When legends slumber inside the bones of a landscape, they wait for the footsteps bold enough to wake them. Picture a dusty August dawn in 86 BC. A pale gold mist drapes the hills of Boeotia, hiding scars left by an older carnage where Philip of Macedon once broke the last free cities of Greece. Now hoofbeats drum again across those same fields, but this time the thunder belongs to Lucius Cornelius Sulla. His red-cloaked veterans limp behind makeshift shields scabbed with Athenian dust, their sandals worn to the stitching from months of siege and starvation rations of rye. They have crossed seas, bribed fickle gods with temples stripped for siege towers, and burned precious scrolls to feed campfires. Yet they still march. Beyond the haze, hidden like a coiled serpent, waits Archelaus, first general of Mithridates VI, commanding a host 4 times the Roman number. Phalanxes bristling with 24-foot pikes, Thracian horse whose scarlet tassels flick like tongues of warning, Scythian archers whose barbed shafts can skewer a shield at 200 paces. Everything sings doom. The ratios, the terrain, even the omens cut into goat livers last night. But Sulla is no ordinary consul. He is a man who paints his destiny in other men's blood, and he has chosen this valley as the canvas for his most daring stroke. What secret measure of iron sits in a commander's soul when he decides that tomorrow's sunrise will immortalize either his triumph or his annihilation? Stay with the story, because the answer lies not just in tactics or raw courage, but in the razor-thin space where desperation becomes genius. The road that led Sulla here began far to the east, where a Pontic king's dream of empire burst across the Aegean like a tidal wave. Mithridates VI, the poison-proof monarch of Pontus, had declared himself the savior of Hellenism, and most of Greece answered. His agents orchestrated the Asiatic Vespers, the single-night massacre of 80,000 Roman and Italian residents from Ephesus to Pergamon, and Rome reeled as if stabbed in the spine. Senators in the Forum shouted for vengeance, but civil war at home had emptied the treasury and split loyalties. Into that chaos strode Sulla, recently appointed consul, debt-choked yet undaunted, staking his political future on the thunder of legions. He borrowed coin at ruinous interest, auctioned the possessions of Rome's richest temples, and sailed for Greece with scarcely 35,000 men, mostly battle-scarred veterans who would follow a commander who paid on time and promised them plunder. Winter storms smashed his transports against the western Peloponnese, but Sulla pushed inland, hammered Athens into submission after a ghastly famine, and hacked down the long walls of Piraeus stone by stone. Meanwhile, Archaeology, nursing Mithridates' grand design, rallied fresh phalanxes from Asia, hired Galatian mercenaries, and settled on the plains of Boeotia, where he could strangle any Roman march toward Macedon. News whispered that he commanded at least 110,000 foot and 15,000 horse, numbers Rome had not seen massed against her since Cannae. It was enough to freeze lesser men, yet Sulla's response was to march straight out of the smoking ruins of Athens and seek a killing field of his own choosing. He bypassed safer passes, tore up vines for timber, and forced his exhausted engineers to raise a fortified camp beside the shallow Cephissus River. The message to his men was stark. We stop running here. We win, or we perish together. Daylight leaked over the ridges like molten brass, illuminating 2 armies that could not have been more unequal in appearance. Archaeology arrayed his ranks in glittering order, Central blocks of Pontic bronze shield phalangites towered behind a hedge of sarissas. On his left, Cappadocian cavalry gleamed beneath silvered cuirasses. On his right, Thracian horse archers twirled lariats and whistled songs older than Homer. Their officers wore Persian silks embroidered with winged lions, exotic banners meant to dazzle Greek allies and intimidate Roman provincials. By contrast, Sulla's legions looked like survivors of a plague. Armor plates were patched with rawhide. Pig grease, instead of bronze polish, darkened their helmets. But inside each battered shield beat a veteran's heart, and behind them crouched portable catapults, giant scorpiones, and a line of rough-hewn fire trenches that Sulla's men had dug through the night. He stationed 40 bronze war trumpets at measured intervals, swore his oath to Jupiter with a sacrificial ram's heart still dripping in his palm, and reminded every cohort that Rome had never lost a war it dared to finish. At midday, Archelaus tested the Roman left. His Cappadocian squadron surged forward like a steel eddy, lances leveled for the charge. Sulla had posted young Lucius Hortensius and a single understrength legion there, apparently a foolish gamble. But the consul knew his opposite general was impatient. As the horsemen pounded toward the thin red line, concealed Roman engineers triggered torsion catapults braced behind brush screens. Jagged stone missiles, scavenged from ruined Greek altars, screamed through the air and exploded in fountains of dust and shattered bone among the cavalry ranks. Confusion rippled like a tear in silk. Foot soldiers in the Pontic center shuffled, sensorily betrayed by the concussive boom. Seizing the moment, Sulla galloped behind his lines, ordering the right flank cohort to feign withdrawal toward the river. Archelaus, scenting Roman collapse, committed his main phalanx, 60 ranks deep, into a full advance. What happened next has been debated by every military historian since Plutarch set ink to papyrus. Some say Sulla unleashed a pre-dug network of wolf pits that toppled the front Macedonian-style ranks. Others that he timed a hidden battery of scorpiones to shear the sarissa tips, rendering the 24-foot pikes useless. Whichever reading you trust, the result was the same. The Pontic phalanx hit an invisible wall and folded along its seams. Roman legionaries sprang through gaps like wrestlers diving beneath awkwardly extended arms, driving their pila point first into groin and armpit, where bronze scales opened like flower petals under impact. Once inside the forest of spears, the short, stabbing gladius reigned supreme. Men died standing, pinned upright by the crush behind them, their blood turning clay to slick red paste. Archelaus attempted to salvage the left by flinging in his Thracian light infantry, but Sulla had reserved the 10th Legion, veterans from the Social War, for this very contingency. They advanced in silent discipline, finished off the collapsing phalanx, then wheeled in perfect synchrony to envelop the Thracians. From a nearby knoll, Sulla watched the maneuver with predatory calm, his cloak snapping in a hot updraft like a crimson flag of doom. He calculated that the battle's fate hung on one last fulcrum. If he could smash Archelaus's cavalry reserve before nightfall, panic would rip through the Pontic line faster than any trumpet. So he rode to his own ailing horse corps under Marcus Murena, roused them with a speech about the living glory of outnumbered Romans at Cynocephalae, and led them in person into a wheeling countercharge. Dust swallowed man and beast. The clang of iron echoed off limestone hillsides. Somewhere within that storm, Sulla's scarred face glimmered with a terrible joy. for he sensed a future consulship, triumph, and perhaps dictatorship being minted with every sword stroke. Twilight bled over the valley before the killing stopped. The Cephasus ran thick as stew with Pontic blood. Starlings circled overhead, screeching at the unfamiliar scent. Archelaus escaped only because his Cappadocian bodyguard sacrificed themselves as a living shield to cover his flight. He would rally survivors at Orchomenus for a last stand months later, but the aura of invincibility had vanished. Sulla bivouacked on the field, ordering Roman dead burned with honors and enemy corpses piled in great mounds, sprinkled with a ration of salt to warn future rebels. He erected a trophy of captured sarissas lashed together, a bitter parody of Alexander's own monument after the earlier Chaeronea, and at its base he nailed a bronze plaque that read simply, El Sulla Fexit. The message was not only to Mithridates, but also to Rome's wrangling Senate. I did this. I will decide how the spoils are divided. Yet, the victory carried darker portents. During the night, a gust ripped through camp, toppling the freshly built trophy so that it landed pointing south, toward Italy, and toward the civil war Sulla suspected awaited his return. He read the omen with sardonic amusement. Fate, it seemed, was never content with a single catastrophe when it could orchestrate two. Still, he wasted no daylight. The next morning, he conscripted Boeotian farmers to refill trenches, gathered bronze shield bosses to melt down for payroll, and set scribes to draft letters bragging that less than 1,500 Roman dead had slaughtered over 60,000 enemies. It was exaggeration, of course, but exaggeration has ever been war's handmaiden, and no one in Rome would dare challenge the figures of the man who had just torn a Pontic empire to tatters. In the following weeks, word of Chaeronea rippled across the Aegean. Cities that had tossed Roman statues into harbors now dragged them back out, scrubbed barnacles from marble togas, and sent envoys begging forgiveness. Mithridates, furious yet pragmatic, wrote to Archaeology that another defeat would cost him his crown. He dispatched fresh gold but fewer men, already nursing doubts about a strategy built on phalanxes in a world dominated by Roman flexibility. Meanwhile, Sulla's officers, Murena, Hortensius, Lucullus, absorbed every scribble-sealed directive their commander uttered, like seeds storing the art of Blitz warfare. Within a generation, those techniques would resurface at Lucullus's victory at Tigranocerta, at Caesar's lightning bridge over the Rhine, even at Trajan's Dacian ramparts. Chaeronea was more than a battle. It was a tactical laboratory whose experiments rewired Rome's military DNA. But the most enduring legacy was psychological. Greek chroniclers who had cheered Mithridates for liberating them from Roman tax farmers now penned scrolls praising Sulla's clemency, conveniently forgetting his siege-borne atrocities in Athens. Poets compared him to Achilles, returned from the dead, his wrath both terrible and protective. Philosophers muttered that maybe destiny, not tyranny, guided Rome's iron hand, and that the ancient gods were merely clearing space for a new cosmic order. Across the Adriatic, however, Marian partisans plotted, sharpening daggers beneath Senate colonnades. They whispered that Sulla's successes proved the danger of letting any one man command too long. Thus, while Chaeronea solidified Rome's supremacy abroad, it deepened the fault lines that would soon crack the Republic from within. Centuries later, tourists stand where the Cephasus once frothed red and marvel at how tranquil the fields appear. A shepherd's dog barks at shadows. Poppies nod over half-buried shards of pottery. The wind sighs through plane trees chiseled by time. No marble plinth announces the turning point of Western fate. That trophy of lashed sarissas rotted to dust long ago, and the bronze plaque was melted down during a medieval famine to make cooking pots. Yet, if you press your ear to the ground, especially near sunset when cicadas quiet, you may hear an echo, the distant blare of 40 war trumpets calling men to wager everything on one afternoon's gamble. It reminds us that history's hinges are narrow, that a single valley can cradle two battles of world-shaping consequence, and that audacity in the face of absurd odds sometimes writes the most indelible chapters of human story. So as the curtain falls on Sulla's Greek Blitz at Chaeronea, ask yourself, what mountains of impossibility loom in your own path? Are you counting casualties before the clash, or digging trenches through the night because retreat is no longer an option? The legionaries who shuffled into this valley carried hunger, fear, debt, and doubt, but they also carried a commander's conviction that bold action backed by ruthless preparation can redraw the map of the possible. If their example stirs even one spark inside you, one plan you shelved as too risky, one dream you kept small to avoid defeat, then let this story be your trumpet. If you found value drifting on the winds of ancient Boeotia tonight, imagine what waits in the next campaign map we will unfurl together. March with us by subscribing and sounding the alarm bell so you never miss another tale where courage and consequence collide. Rally fellow history seekers by sharing this video, and leave a comment about which forgotten clash you want resurrected next. Your curiosity is the muster roll, your click the enrollment oath. Lift the standard, tighten your sandal straps, and step back onto the march. Because the past is not finished sharpening its lessons, and the next valley of decision lies just beyond the horizon.